I grew up in a small town where nothing ever seemed to change. The same families lived on the same streets for decades, and everybody knew everybody. That was why the arrival of a new neighbor immediately caught everyone's attention. The old house across the road had been abandoned for years, its paint peeled in long, curling strips. The garden was choked with weeds. Kids whispered that no one wanted to live there because the place was cursed. So when one night the lights suddenly flickered on inside, it felt like the entire neighborhood held its breath. No one ever saw a moving truck. No one saw anyone carrying boxes or furniture. Just one evening, there was a light behind those cracked windows, and then he appeared. At least we thought it was a he. The figure was tall, always wrapped in black clothing. A long coat, a hood that shadowed the face so deeply you could never see features. Some said it was a man. Others swore the shape was too thin, too sharp, like a woman, or maybe not human at all. The strange neighbor never spoke to anyone, never waved, never came to the local store, never greeted the mailman. People only spotted him late at night, moving along the yard, carrying something heavy in his arms, or simply standing at the edge of the street, as if watching. At first, I told myself it was none of my business. People had a right to privacy, even if they were eccentric. But soon, strange things began happening. One night, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside my window. Slow, deliberate, dragging footsteps, like boots pulling through gravel. I thought it was a stray dog or maybe one of the neighbors coming home late. But when I peeked through the blinds, I froze. Across the street, under the dim glow of the lamp, stood the hooded figure. Perfectly still, head tilted in my direction. I couldn't see the face, but I felt it staring straight at me. The next morning, I asked around. Mrs. Holloway, who lived 2 houses down, claimed she had seen the figure too, wandering past her fence, carrying what looked like a sack that twitched. She thought it was an animal, but when she called out, the neighbor simply froze, turned his hood toward her, and kept walking without a word. A week later, pets started to go missing. Cats, dogs, even birds in cages. Nobody had proof, but whispers spread quickly. It's him. I tried to ignore it, but it's hard to ignore something that doesn't seem to ignore you. Another night, I woke again to that dragging sound. This time, it was right outside my porch. My pulse hammered in my ears as I crept to the peephole of the front door. And there he was. The hooded neighbor stood inches away, facing the door. One hand, long, pale fingers, slowly traced across the wood, leaving faint scratches as though testing it. I held my breath, terrified he would hear me. Then, as if sensing me, he lifted his head. For a moment, even through the peephole, I swore I saw the faint gleam of eyes. Not human eyes, too reflective, like an animal's caught in headlights. I stumbled back, my body shaking. Seconds later, silence. No footsteps leaving, no door opening across the street. Just silence, heavy and suffocating. The next morning, I checked the door. The scratches were real, thin but deep, curling downward like claw marks. I wanted to call the police, but what would I say? That my strange neighbor in black liked to scratch doors? They'd laugh me out of the station. Still, the fear lingered, and soon things escalated. One evening, I was reading in bed when a crash shattered the quiet. The kitchen window broken. I bolted downstairs, flashlight in hand. Through the shards of glass, I saw him. The hooded figure was halfway inside my house. One arm reaching forward, the black hood slowly turning toward me. Before I could scream, a voice filled the room. Not loud, but rasping, like dry leaves scraping together. You watch too much. And just like that, he was gone. No footsteps, no door creaking. Just the broken glass, the cold wind rushing in, and me standing frozen, unable to understand what I had just witnessed. I didn't sleep that night because it finally hit me. Whoever or whatever lived across the street knew I was watching. And now it wasn't just my neighbor, it was inside my life. I told myself I imagined it. That the hooded figure hadn't really climbed halfway into my kitchen. That the strange voice was only the product of stress and lack of sleep. But deep down, I knew better. The scratches on the door, the missing pets, the way every shadow in the house seemed to lean toward me. Over the next few days, I tried to act normal. I went to work, smiled at coworkers, bought groceries. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that someone followed me everywhere I went. I'd glance over my shoulder in a parking lot and see a figure at the far end, standing perfectly still. By the time I blinked, it was gone. I stopped sleeping. Every sound in the night became a warning. A creak, a rustle, a faint tapping at the window. My body was tired, but my mind stayed alert, waiting, expecting that rasping voice to crawl out of the dark again. Finally, I decided to confront the house itself. If this neighbor was truly human, then there had to be answers. And if not, maybe I needed to see for myself what I was really dealing with. One cloudy evening, I crossed the street. The air felt heavier the closer I got, like I was walking into water. The front yard was choked with weeds, the path cracked and broken. When I reached the door, I hesitated. The wood was warped, and faint claw marks scored the frame, as if from the inside. I pushed. The door creaked open without resistance. The smell hit me first. Damp, mold, and something metallic underneath. Inside, the house was dark, except for a faint glow seeping from the hallway. Dust coated every surface. The furniture was covered in sheets, untouched, like no one had lived there for decades. But then I heard it, a soft sound like whispering. I followed the glow to the living room. There, in the center, stood the hooded figure. The glow came from behind it, from dozens of objects arranged carefully on the floor. I stepped closer and felt my stomach twist. They were collars. Dozens of them, from cats, dogs, even birds, each one glowing faintly as if lit from within. The figure didn't move. For a moment, I thought it hadn't noticed me. Then it spoke. You watch. You listen. What you do not understand. Its voice was layered, male and female, young and old, all at once. My throat went dry. Who are you? I forced out. The figure slowly lifted its head. From beneath the hood, I finally saw eyes, two circles of pale, gleaming light, shifting like smoke. Not human, not animal, something else. This place belongs to me, it hissed. They are mine, and now, so are you. The glow from the collars flared. For a split second, I heard yowls, barks, chirps, all at once, echoing as though the missing animals were calling from inside the walls. I staggered back, but the figure glided closer, silent, its shadow stretching unnaturally across the room. I bolted, out the door, across the street, heart hammering so hard I thought my chest would explode. I didn't look back until I slammed my own door shut and locked every bolt. For hours, I sat in the corner, clutching a kitchen knife, waiting. But the figure never followed. The next day, I returned with police. I told them everything. The break-in, the collars, the intruder. They searched the house from top to bottom. It was empty. No figure, no collars, no glow. The officers exchanged skeptical looks and told me maybe I needed rest, that the house had been vacant for years, that no one had moved in. I insisted. I begged them to believe me, but they only shook their heads and left. That night, the lights across the street were out again. The house looked as abandoned as it ever had. For a moment, I thought maybe I really had lost my mind. Maybe the stress had invented everything. But when I went to bed, I found something waiting on my pillow. A collar. My neighbor's cat's collar. The one that went missing 3 nights ago. And scratched into the wood of my headboard were 3 words, carved deep enough to splinter. Still watching you. I didn't sleep that night. Or the next, because I know the truth now. The figure never left. It never could. It's still there, behind that hood, inside that house, or maybe inside mine. And every night, when the world goes quiet, I hear it again. The dragging footsteps, the slow scrape at my door. My neighbor is still out there, and it's waiting. When I first moved into the building, I thought I was lucky. The rent was cheap for such a central area, and the apartment itself wasn't bad, small but bright enough, with windows facing the courtyard. The only odd thing was how quiet the floor was. There were 2 apartments on my level, mine and the one across the hallway. I didn't see anyone come in or out of that other place for the first 2 weeks. The door was always shut. The nameplate scratched beyond recognition. The peephole dark. One night, as I was carrying groceries upstairs, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. The opposite door was slightly open, just a sliver, like someone was standing behind it, watching. When I glanced directly, the gap shut quietly, as if nothing had happened. The next morning, when I left for work, there was something lying on my doormat. A silver button, old, tarnished, with a cracked surface. I assumed it'd fallen off someone's coat, but when it happened again, a rusty key this time, I felt uneasy. I finally saw her on a rainy evening. I was unlocking my door when I heard a whisper behind me. "Cold tonight, isn't it?" I turned. My neighbor stood there, a woman in her late 30s, maybe early 40s. She was pale, almost unnaturally so, with hair that looked damp even though it wasn't raining inside the building. Her eyes, they didn't quite meet mine, as if she was looking just past me. "Yes," I muttered, startled. "It is." She smiled faintly. Then, without another word, she slipped back into her apartment. The door closed without a sound. After that, I began noticing her more often, sometimes through the frosted glass of the stairwell, standing still as if waiting for something. Sometimes at her window at night, unmoving, staring across the courtyard. And then the noises began. At first it was footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth behind the wall we shared. Then whispers, too soft to make out words, but constant, like someone holding a one-sided conversation. I pressed my ear to the plaster once, thinking maybe she was on the phone. But no, it sounded like she was talking to the wall itself. I asked the landlord about her. His expression shifted uncomfortably. "The woman across the hall? I wouldn't worry about her," he said quickly. "She's quiet, keeps to herself." He changed the subject before I could press further. But the strangest part came a week later. I was coming home late, past midnight. As I reached my door, I realized hers was wide open. Not ajar, wide open, the dark interior stretching into silence. "Hello?" I called, hesitant. No answer. I should have left it at that, but curiosity got the better of me. I stepped closer. The air from inside was cold, far colder than the hallway. I leaned slightly, just enough to peek in. The apartment was completely empty. No furniture, no carpet, no sign that anyone lived there. Just bare walls, and a faint damp smell, like an abandoned cellar. And yet, as I stood frozen in the doorway, I felt eyes on me. From the back of the apartment, in the dark, I thought I saw her silhouette. Standing perfectly still. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my keys. The door slammed shut in my face, with such force that the wall shook. My heart pounded. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, that maybe the place had been vacant all along. But that night, as I lay in bed, I woke to a sound that froze me completely. Someone was knocking, not at my door, from inside my apartment, and the knock came from the wall I shared with hers. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Every few minutes the knocks would return, soft and deliberate, like someone rapping their knuckles against the inside of the wall. Sometimes it was 3 knocks, sometimes just 1, but always in the same spot, right beside my bed. By morning, exhaustion dulled the fear. I convinced myself it must have been pipes or some old part of the building settling. That's what old apartments do, I thought. They make noise, but the unease never left. That evening, as I came up the stairs, I froze. My doormat was gone. In its place was something else, a folded piece of yellowed paper. Inside, written in shaky letters, was just one word: stay. I felt a chill run down my spine. Was it a warning or a threat? The next day, I decided I needed answers. I waited until I saw my neighbor. She was standing at the window on the landing, staring down at the street. She didn't turn as I approached. "Excuse me," I began carefully. I live across from you. I just wanted to ask." She turned slowly. Her eyes were darker than I remembered, almost empty, and when she smiled, I realized something that made my stomach twist. Her lips didn't move the way they should. It was like the expression was being pulled onto her face, stretched too wide, too forced. "You shouldn't open the door," she whispered. I blinked. "What do you mean?" But she was already walking away, slipping into her apartment without another sound. That night, I double-checked every lock in my place. I tried to distract myself with television, with music, anything, but I couldn't shake her words. "You shouldn't open the door." Around 2 a.m., the knocking began again. 3 sharp raps. I held my breath. This time it wasn't the wall, it was my front door. I crept toward it, barefoot, every nerve in my body screaming to stay away. The knocking came again, louder. Whoever was outside wasn't leaving. I pressed my eye to the peephole. For a moment, I couldn't see anyone. The hallway was empty. Then slowly, her face came into view. My neighbor, standing impossibly close to the door, staring directly into the peephole, as if she knew I was looking. Her lips moved soundlessly, but I couldn't hear a word. I stumbled back, heart hammering. The knocking resumed, harder this time, shaking the door on its hinges. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I didn't dare sleep. By dawn, I checked the hallway. Nothing. No neighbor. No note. No sound. But something had changed. When I went downstairs later that day, I stopped by the landlord's office. I needed the truth. "The woman across the hall," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who is she?" He looked at me for a long moment, then sighed. "There hasn't been anyone in that apartment for years. It's been empty since the last tenant passed away. A woman, alone." My blood ran cold, but I've seen her. I've spoken to her. The landlord just shook his head. "You're not the first to say that." That night, when I returned home, her door was wide open again. Inside was only darkness, and from the shadows, I heard her voice. "Cold tonight, isn't it?" I never wanted to move to this neighborhood. The houses were too close together, the yards too neatly trimmed, silence of the street too staged, as if everyone had agreed to keep things unnaturally still. But when my wife insisted that this was the perfect place to raise our daughter, I gave in. She said the quiet would be good for us. At first, everything seemed fine, perfect even. The lawn stayed green without a single brown patch. The curtains in every house seemed to match in length. The neighbors smiled when they waved, but never long enough for it to feel sincere. It was the kind of place where everyone tried too hard to look normal. Then the family next door introduced themselves. They were the Wards, mother, father, and 2 children. At least, I assumed the younger boy was their son, though something about him didn't add up. Their smiles lingered too long, as if rehearsed. They never broke eye contact while talking. Even the children had this same hollow politeness, the kind that made my skin crawl. "Welcome to the neighborhood," Mrs. Ward said, standing just a little too close. Her voice was warm, but her eyes didn't move when she smiled. "We're so glad you're here." My daughter Emma clung to my hand, whispering later that she didn't like the way the Ward boy had stared at her. "He didn't blink, Dad," she said. I laughed it off at the time, but I had noticed it too. The days passed, and the Wards seemed to be everywhere. If I left for work, Mr. Ward would already be outside, sweeping his driveway, though there was nothing to sweep. If I returned late at night, their upstairs light would flicker on just as I pulled into the driveway, as if they'd been waiting. One evening, I stepped outside to take the trash out. Their entire family was in their backyard, standing in a perfect line, staring at my house. No movement, no sound. When they realized I had seen them, they all turned their heads at the same time and waved. The synchronization made my stomach drop. My wife dismissed it, saying I was letting my imagination run wild. "They're just trying to be friendly," she insisted. Not everyone has to behave like us. But friendly people don't stand in the dark, watching your house like predators. A week later, Emma came into our room crying. She said she'd woken up to see the Ward boy standing outside her window. I rushed outside, but the yard was empty. No footprints in the grass, no signs of anyone being there. Still, she was so shaken that we kept her in our room that night. The next morning, I went over to confront them. Mrs. Ward opened the door instantly, as though she had been waiting just behind it. "Is everything all right, neighbor?" she asked. I told her about Emma's claim. She didn't deny it, didn't even look surprised. Instead, she just smiled, in that stiff mannequin way of hers. "Children make up such funny stories, don't they?" she said softly. "It's better not to encourage them." Her eyes flicked past me, toward my house, lingering a little too long on Emma's window, before she slowly shut the door. That night, I couldn't sleep. At around 2 a.m., I heard faint scratching sounds at the wall near Emma's room. I grabbed a flashlight and went outside, heart pounding. The Ward's lights were all on. Every single room glowed brightly, though the curtains were tightly drawn. As I watched, I saw silhouettes moving inside. They weren't moving like people do. They moved in slow, deliberate motions, like puppets being adjusted by invisible strings. I stood frozen in the yard, the flashlight trembling in my hand, until I noticed something worse. There was another silhouette, pressed right up against Emma's window. I sprinted back inside, but when I burst into her room, no one was there. Emma was asleep, undisturbed. And yet, the glass of the window was ice cold to the touch, as though someone had been leaning against it for hours. The next day, I tried to talk to my wife again. I told her something was wrong with the Wards, that I didn't trust them, that I wanted to leave. She brushed me off, calling me paranoid. But that evening, she came home with a strange look on her face. "I had tea with Mrs. Ward today," she said. Her voice was calm, but her hands were trembling slightly. She asked me if Emma was a good sleeper. She wanted to know if Emma ever walked around at night. She asked if she ever sleep-talked. Isn't that strange? Her eyes darted to the window, and for the first time, I saw fear in her expression. That night, we locked every door, every window, every possible way in. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter, because the Wards didn't behave like neighbors. They behaved like people who already thought they belonged inside our home. And by the time the clock struck midnight, I understood just how far they were willing to go. That night, I barely slept. Every sound from the walls felt amplified, every creak in the house a warning. Around 3 in the morning, I woke to the sound of whispering. It wasn't inside the room. It was outside, carried through the walls like a faint radio signal. I crept to the window and pulled back the curtain just slightly. The Ward family stood in their yard again, lined up exactly as before, but this time they weren't facing my house. They were facing each other, whispering in perfect unison, their lips moving at the same pace, their bodies swaying gently. Then, as though sensing me, all 4 of them stopped and turned their heads toward my window at the same exact second. I dropped the curtain and backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. I wanted to wake my wife, but what could I even say? They're whispering in the dark, like synchronized dolls. She already thought I was losing it, but Emma believed me. The following morning, she refused to eat breakfast. She just stared at her cereal, pale and trembling. Finally, she whispered, "Dad, the Ward boy came into my room last night. He didn't use the door. He came out of the wall." I froze. My wife snapped at her, saying it was just a nightmare. But Emma's hand shook so badly, the spoon clattered out of her grip. That was the breaking point for me. I told my wife we were leaving. Today, tonight. I didn't care. But when I went to look for our car keys, they weren't where I left them. Hours later, after tearing the house apart, I found them neatly placed on our porch swing, as though someone had set them there for me to find. I hadn't put them there. That evening, I went next door, intending to confront the Wards one last time. But when I knocked, no one answered. I pressed my ear to the door and heard faint voices inside, chanting, rhythmic, like a lullaby being repeated again and again. Through the curtain, I could see movement. The 4 of them standing in a circle, their heads bowed, something cradled in the middle. At first, I thought it was a doll. But then, with a sickening realization, I recognized the pink sleeve of Emma's pajama shirt. I nearly broke the door down, but it swung open before I touched it. The Wards stood there, smiling. Their hands were empty. Their living room was spotless, bare, almost too bare. No furniture except for a table and 4 chairs, placed in perfect alignment. No sign of Emma. "Looking for something?" Mr. Ward asked softly. His voice was too calm, too rehearsed. I stumbled back, words choking in my throat, and ran home. Emma was in her room, fast asleep, as though nothing had happened. When I tried to wake her, she opened her eyes and whispered, "They told me not to tell you. They said you wouldn't understand." I didn't sleep that night. Neither did my wife. By morning, the Ward's house was empty. No cars in the driveway, no lights, no sign of life. Curtains drawn tight. It was as if they had never existed. The realtor later claimed the house had been vacant for years. She showed us the listing records, the locked deed, the inspection reports. She insisted no family had lived there since the previous owner died a decade ago. But I know what I saw. My wife won't speak of it. Emma refuses to even look at the house. But some nights, when the street is quiet, I hear it again. That faint whispering carried through the walls in perfect unison. And sometimes, when I walk past Emma's room, I see the shadow of a small figure standing perfectly still by her bed.